Today's lesson is a snapshot of the camera's history. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to continue talking about the history of the camera, which does have to do with photography. And, of course, it has a long history. It doesn't just go back to the cameras in the 1800s that were invented in France. There was actually the concept around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And last time we talked about Mozart, right? He documented the phenomenon known as the camera obscura effect. And then some Arab scholar talked about the same concept a little while later.
Right, so Mozart discovered this effect called the camera obscura effect, and then later on an Arab scholar wrote in detail about this effect, and then later on people were building camera obscura devices.
Exactly, but they weren't really cameras per se. They helped project an image on a screen, and then they'd put a piece of tracing paper or something on the wall, and they would trace the image with a pencil or with a pen or whatever. But we're going to continue talking about the history of cameras in today's lesson. We'll take off from there, from camera obscura devices. So let's continue with our lesson for today. Let's listen to the first part, and we'll come back to break it down for you.
Camera obscura devices are often considered the earliest cameras, but they couldn't fix an image and thus truly create a photograph. It had been demonstrated, however, that certain substances darken upon being exposed to light. Among those experimenting with these chemicals was a Frenchman named Joseph Nicephore Niepce, who used a wooden box and a chemical-covered metal plate to create the first permanent photograph in 1825. In those early days, the photograph was actually the plate itself, which had an image burned onto it.
大家好。第一部分我们可以看到单字 expose 这个字是动词，指的是使接触到或是使受点点点影响，或是使暴露于点点点。例如 Some of the workers at the company may have been exposed to dangerous gases. 公司里的有一些工人可能已经暴露在危险气体中。或者 YouTube is used by many up-and-coming artists to expose their music. YouTube 被许多新兴艺人用来曝光自己的音乐。另外去掉这个词的字尾 e 再加上 ure 就变成名词 exposure。举例来说 To prevent skin cancer, you should try to limit your exposure to the sun. 为了预防皮肤癌，你应该试着限制自己在阳光下的曝晒。再举一个例子 Repeated exposure to loud music over a long period of time can damage your hearing. 再三的让自己长时间的接触大声音乐会损害你的听力。接下来我们看到形容词 permanent， 它的意思是永久的、长久的或是长期的。例如 The scar on Brian's knee will be permanent. Brian 膝盖上的疤痕会是永久性的。再举一个例子 This won't be my permanent address since I'm staying here for only a few months. 这不会是我的永久住址，因为我只会在这里住几个月。另外补充这个字的反义形容词 temporary temporary, temporary 表示暂时的或是临时的。例如 I covered the hole with tape as a temporary solution to the leak in the tub. 我用胶带封住那个洞，作为浴缸漏水的临时解决办法。又或者说 To save money, the company prefers to hire temporary workers. 为了要省钱，公司偏好雇用临时工。
So camera obscura devices are often considered the earliest cameras, but they couldn't fix an image and thus truly create a photograph. So even though we associate camera obscura devices with a photo camera, with today's camera, they're not considered cameras really because they weren't able to fix a photo, an image. They weren't able to keep that image, so the images weren't permanent. And if that's the case, then the camera obscura isn't able to produce photographs.
So here we've got fix, which means to make something firm, make something permanent. And of course, this reminds me of the fixer, which is used in chemical photography. If you're developing a photograph in the dark room, you have the developer, then you have the stop bath, and then you have the fixer, which you use to fix the image on the paper, and later you wash the photograph and hang it up to dry. That's a lengthy process, but in any case, it's related here because, yeah, you're trying to fix an image to keep it forever.
Right, so the camera obscura device couldn't fix an image and thus keep it forever. However, it had been demonstrated that certain substances darken upon being exposed to light. So when you demonstrate something, you show clearly that that thing is true or that it exists. And here it was demonstrated by experts, by photography enthusiasts, or by artists that certain substances, certain liquids, for instance, turn dark upon being exposed to light. So here, upon means immediately after. Substances darken immediately after they are exposed to light.
Exactly, upon. That means when something happened, immediately you had a result. For example, upon hearing the news of his dog's death, John started crying incessantly. But here, of course, we're talking about a light exposing something and changing it. And yes, indeed, when light exposes a certain substance, like something made from silver or something like that, or even our skin when we go out and get a suntan, yes, we are exposed to light. And of course, here the verb to expose means to put something in the presence of something, to uncover something so that something else can get to it. So in the old film cameras, of course, the film is inside the camera, but it's all dark in there. And then when you take a picture, the shutter opens, and then that exposes the film. Light is able to shine on the surface of the film. And then later on, through a chemical process, you can have an actual photograph. So to expose is the verb, and exposure is used in photography. That talks about how much light you let into the camera to expose the film or to expose the sensor.
Right, so if a photo is overexposed, then it might look washed out or it might look too bright. You can't see anything because it's too white. So that might be something that happens after there is an overexposure to light. Now, among those experimenting with these chemicals was a Frenchman named Joseph Nicephore Niepce, who used a wooden box and a chemical-covered metal plate to create the first permanent photograph in 1825.
So if something's permanent, that means it lasts for a long time, or at least forever. This is a photograph that supposedly can last for hundreds of years.
Right, or I could also say, this is my permanent home. I have no intentions of moving anywhere else, meaning this is where I'm going to live for a very long time or forever. Now, in those early days, the photograph was actually the plate itself, which had an image burned onto it. So Niepce's process utilized a metal plate. So in those days, the photo was actually on that metal plate, whereas today, of course, if we're going to print those photos that we took, we're going to print it on paper. But back then, the photograph itself was the metal plate with an image on it.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on to the next part.
The next breakthrough came in the 1830s when the English scientist William Fox Talbot developed a process for creating paper photographs. First, a negative image was created in a camera. Light was then shone through the negative to create a positive image on paper. This technique allowed many prints to be created from one negative and paved the way for photographic film and the portable 35mm camera.
第二部分我们看到单字 breakthrough， 这个字是名词，指的是重大进展或是突破。例如 The two countries achieved a breakthrough in their peace talks. 那两个国家在和平对谈中达成重大进展。或是 These results represent a major breakthrough in cancer treatment. 这些成果代表着癌症治疗的重大突破。
So in the last part, we looked at the development that was made by the Frenchman Joseph Niepce, who was the first person to use a wooden box and a chemical-covered metal plate to create the first permanent photograph. Now, the next breakthrough came in the 1830s, so just a few years later, when the English scientist William Fox Talbot developed a process for creating paper photographs.
Exactly. So that's where we get the paper photographs, and they're easier to distribute and to display on walls in frames and things like that. So yes, indeed, this happened way back in the 1830s, and he developed a process for creating paper photographs. How is that possible? Well, first, a negative image was created in a camera. So there you go, negative. You have all the opposites. The light areas of a scene come out on the negative as dark, and the dark areas of a scene come out as light on the negative. And then when you use that negative on paper, it reverses the process again, and then you get a positive image of what you actually saw at the time. In the old days, of course, if you took pictures with a film camera and you got the film back from the processors, you'd have the negatives, okay? And you would use the negatives to make prints from. Some of you may be old enough to remember those days. So, yes, indeed, light was then shown through the negative to create a positive image on paper. You probably needed to use a device called an enlarger.
And that was indeed a breakthrough because before then, there was not any other possibility than to have a photo on a metal plate. So a breakthrough, once again, is a discovery or an achievement that comes after a lot of hard work or a lot of trial and error. I could also say, for instance, that the scientists are still waiting for a breakthrough in cancer treatment. So they're working hard to find a cure for cancer, but they have not arrived at a breakthrough yet.
There are lots of technical breakthroughs with a smartphone. Of course, before smartphones came out, we just had the dumb phones, which could only send text messages, and we could only talk on them with other people, but we couldn't go online and check out Instagram posts and stuff like that. So, of course, we had to wait for technical breakthroughs with technology there. But yes, we've got a breakthrough occurring in the 1830s. Talbot invented this process for paper photographs, and we just explained the process to you. This technique allowed many prints to be created from one negative and paved the way for photographic film and the portable 35mm camera. These may have been direct prints. If they used very large negatives, they could just simply put the negative over the paper in the darkroom and expose it without an enlarger, but later on they used smaller film in 35mm cameras, which of course some of you may know about, the Olympus OM1, as I said earlier, the Nikon FM2, the Pentax K1000, etc. Those were all very common 35mm film cameras, as well as, of course, the Leica.
Right, so Talbot's technique allowed many prints to be created from one negative and paved the way for photographic film. So here, the phrase pave the way means to create a situation that makes it possible or that makes it easier for something else to happen. So you could say, as an example, that Elvis Presley paved the way for future rock and roll stars, or Bruce Lee paved the way for many other kung fu masters to become famous in film. So literally, when you pave the way, you're setting a road, or you're setting the path for somebody to do something to help them do it more easily.
Yep, indeed. And then you had film, you had the Kodak Brownie cameras, and of course lots of people could take pictures and have fun with photography. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the third and final part.
These days, most cameras use digital sensors to capture light and store it as data, but they remain indebted to devices that utilized light-sensitive chemicals and the camera obscura effect. Without these inventions, the camera as we know it today might not exist.
第三部分我们看到单字 sensor， 这个字是名词，意思是感应器或是感测器。例如 The sensor turns on the water when you place your hands under the faucet. 当你把手放在水龙头下，感应器就会打开水。或是 When someone walks in front of the sensor, the lights turn on. 当有人走过这个感应器前，灯就会亮起来。另外补充这个字的相关动词 sense, S-E-N-S-E, sense, 表示察觉或是感觉到。例如Kelly sensed something wrong and didn't go in the house. Kelly 察觉到不对劲，所以没有进到屋内。又或者说 Animals can sense danger faster than people. 动物能比人类更快察觉到危险。
So coming to the present moment, now these days, most cameras use digital sensors to capture light and store it as data. So of course, these days, most people take photos using their smartphones, and these smartphones are equipped with digital sensors in their cameras. So digital refers to the process of storing picture, sound information as numbers or as electric signals.
Exactly. So, yes, this is digital photography as opposed to chemical photography. Of course, back in the day, we did not refer to it as chemical photography. We just use that term nowadays to compare it to digital photography. And, of course, with film cameras, you had to have film. And with digital cameras, you have a sensor. There are different sizes of sensors and different types of sensors. So you need to do some research before you buy a digital camera, although most smartphones operate without you knowing too much about photography. And yes, indeed, those sensors will capture light, and then the information will be stored as data on an SD card, or maybe it will be sent to the cloud. But modern digital cameras remain indebted to devices that utilized light-sensitive chemicals and the camera obscura effect. So yes, every time you take a picture with your smartphone, you need to remember that it used to be not so easy. Back in the day, of course, you had to spend lots of money on film and processing, which you don't have to now. So yes, indeed, if you know a little bit about the origins of the camera, you'll probably become a better photographer in the present.
Right, so today's cameras remain indebted to devices that utilize light-sensitive chemicals. So when you are indebted to something or somebody, it means that you are grateful to that person or thing for their help in allowing you to achieve something today. So today's cameras are indebted to yesterday's cameras because without yesterday's cameras, we wouldn't have today's cameras. So we are indebted to those cameras, to devices that utilize. Now, utilize is another word for use. You can also say devices that use light-sensitive chemicals. The only difference between utilize and use is that I would use the word utilize in a technical sense. So if I were to utilize a machine to do something, then that means I'm using the machine. But utilize is used more for technical or procedural actions.
You're spot on there, Helen, and we've learned a lot about photography in today's lesson. And I must say, as an avid photographer, I did learn some things about myself, or at least about photography, especially in regard to Moza actually having the camera obscura concept way back when. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to turn things over to our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始写到 Camera obscura devices are often considered the earliest cameras. 暗箱装置常被视为是最早的相机。那么文中它用到动词 consider 去表达认为，把什么什么视为。那我们以下介绍它的主动和被动用法。先来看主动用法是 consider 某人或某事物，to be 再加上名词或形容词，其中的 to be 可以省略，这表达说认为某人或某事物怎么样，将某人或某事物视为怎么样怎么样。再来看被动用法，它的句型则是某人或某事物加上 be considered to be 再加名词或形容词，其中的 to be 一样可以省略，这表示说某人或某事物被认为是怎么样，被视为点点点。 就来看2个例句吧。Ross considers himself to be funny， 也可以说 Ross considers himself funny。Ross 觉得自己很搞笑。The actress is considered to be a fashion icon， 或是 The actress is considered a fashion icon， 那位女演员被视为时尚指标。好，另外我们也可以用 think of， 或者是 see，或是 view 或是 regard 去表达认为视为。那它们的主动用法呢，你就是可以用 think of see view 或是 regard 加上某人或某事物，后面用 as 再加名词或形容词。那么被动用法则是用某人或某事物加上 be viewed as be seen as be regarded as be thought of as 再加名词或形容词。一样看2个例句哦。She viewed the job as the opportunity of a lifetime. 她认为这个工作是千载难逢的好机会。This place is thought of as the best restaurant in the city. 这个地方被认为是城市里最棒的餐厅了。好，我们接着看到课文第一部分呢，它只有用到单字 expose， 它是动词，可以表达使接触到什么，使受到什么影响，使暴露于什么什么。那我们来学它的字首字根。先看到 pose pose 当名词，它有姿势姿态的意思。它当字根则是有 put 或是 place， 也就是放置摆放的意思。那么在 expose 这个字当中，它的字首 ex 表示向外， pose 表示摆放。那向外摆放对外展示，应该很容易联想到 expose 它有使什么什么暴露或者是揭露的意思。那顺便补充2个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 dispose， 它的字首 dis 表示分开，那么 pose 表示摆放，把事物分开摆放，那就有整理、安排或是处置的语义咯。好，第2个补充的是 propose， 它的字首 pro 表示在点点点之前，那么 pose 表示放置。当我们把这个想法计划提出来摆在前面，那其实就是有提议建议的意思咯。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Demonstrate. The study demonstrated how water pollution can affect people's health. Expose. The house's paint had faded after being exposed to the weather for years and years. Permanent. The statue of the general was meant to serve as a permanent memorial of his victory. Breakthrough. The police had a big breakthrough that allowed them to finally solve the mystery. Digital. Older cars do not use digital technologies, and this can make them easier to repair. Sensor. The heater contains a temperature sensor that tells it when to turn on and off. Utilize. The power plant utilizes the flow of water to produce electricity.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. As the article notes, camera technology has advanced a lot over time. Can you imagine some additional advances to camera technology that might occur in the future?
Well, in the future, I think that cameras might be able to record smells as well. There might be the technology that will allow a camera to do that. Whenever I see a picture, the first thing that comes to mind is, how does that thing smell? How does what I'm seeing smell? So I would love to have photographs that also produced smells.
Well, in the future, I think that cameras might be able to capture everything all the time. In fact, you may actually be able to have a built-in camera inside your head, or there'll be some connection between your eyes and a camera somewhere on your body or in your brain. And if you see something, you'll be able to fetch that photograph from the database inside your brain and reproduce it right there, and you'll be able to keep that image forever, not just photographs, but also video footage as well.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.